The night was closing in fast when Elias Boone realized he wasn't alone. The forest had gone too quiet. No crickets, no wind, only the whisper of snow settling on pine branches. His breath came out in short, cold bursts as he scanned the tree line, hand gripping the worn handle of his hunting knife. Then he heard it, a low, broken whimper, faint but desperate. It wasn't human. He turned toward the sound, pushing through the tangle of brush until the beam of his lantern caught on something glinting in the snow. A shape, trembling, tangled in barbed wire, eyes wide with fear and pain. The mountain, silent for months, had just called his name again. Hope you enjoyed this story. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear where you're watching from. Now, let's continue with the story. Elias crouched, his boots sinking into the half-frozen mud. The creature before him was a dog, large, thin, ribs like knife blades beneath mangy fur, one paw caught cruelly in the snarl of rusted wire. Its muzzle was streaked with frost and blood. When Elias moved closer, the animal's growl was weak but full of terror. "Easy, boy," Elias whispered, his voice rough from years of silence. He lowered the lantern and took out his hunting knife, gloved fingers steady despite the cold. The wire was wrapped deep, cutting into flesh. Whoever set this trap hadn't meant to catch rabbits. Snow began to fall harder, settling on his shoulders, dusting his beard. He cut through one strand, then another, until the last coil snapped free. The dog collapsed into the snow, too weak to stand. That was when Elias noticed a small metal tag buried under its matted fur, an oval plate bolted to a collar of thick leather. On it, half buried beneath grime, was a symbol, a triangle with an eye in the center, surrounded by faint letters that looked military. His heart gave a slow, uneasy thud. He had seen something like it once before. He slung the limp dog over his shoulder and began the slow trek back to his cabin. The storm was coming in heavy now, wind sweeping through the trees like a ghost's cry. Every step crunched on frozen needles. The old path to his cabin twisted between pines and steep ridges, and he moved through it by instinct, guided by years of isolation. Inside, the cabin glowed faintly from the embers of a dying fire. He laid the animal on a patchwork rug near the hearth, then poured whiskey over the wound to clean it. The dog jerked and whimpered, but Elias held firm. "You'll hate me now, boy," he muttered, "but you'll thank me if you live." He wrapped the paw in a strip torn from an old flannel shirt, then fetched a bowl of water and stale bread softened in broth. The dog didn't eat. It only stared, eyes half open, breathing shallow. Elias sat back, staring into the fire. For years, he'd built this cabin to keep the world out. Now the world, whatever was left of it, had found its way back in. He couldn't shake the feeling that something about the metal tag mattered. Later that night, he set it on the table and cleaned it with a rag. The triangle and eye symbol gleamed faintly in the lantern light. Underneath, scratched numbers appeared. V19, V19. He remembered where he'd seen it, on a rusted steel drum near the lake 2 weeks ago, half buried in snow. It had the same symbol. He'd thought it was leftover trash from some old mining operation. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "What the hell were you doing out there?" he murmured. Outside, the storm hit full force, wind battering against the cabin walls. The dog stirred, letting out a low, guttural sound that made Elias look up sharply. Its eyes were open now, glinting amber in the firelight. Something about the way it stared at him, steady, knowing, made his skin prickle. "You've seen things, haven't you?" he said softly. For a long moment, man and animal simply watched each other. Then the dog laid its head back down, breath rasping. Elias fed another log into the fire and stayed awake through most of the night, listening to the wind. Somewhere deep in the storm, he thought he heard the faint hum of rotor blades, the sound of a drone, or maybe a distant memory he didn't want to face. By dawn, the storm had quieted. The forest was white and still. Elias stepped outside to check his snares. The air was sharp, clear, and heavy with silence. When he returned, the dog was awake, sitting awkwardly near the hearth, its injured paw stretched out. "Well, look at you," he said, still breathing. "Guess we'll have to call you Keeper." The name came from nowhere, but it fit. The dog tilted its head as if understanding. As Elias poured coffee into a tin mug, something caught his eye through the frost-covered window. Down near the tree line, movement, a flicker of silver, then gone. He set the mug down slowly. It could have been a deer, or it could have been someone watching. He checked the rifle hanging above the door, loaded 2 rounds and set it within reach. That night, he dreamed of smoke and screaming, of fire rushing through pine canyons, and a small hand slipping from his grasp. When he jolted awake, the dog was growling at the window, ears pinned. The fire had burned down to embers. Outside, faint lights moved between the trees, white, mechanical, deliberate. Elias's pulse quickened. He reached for the rifle, the old fear returning like a breath held too long. Whatever had left that tag on the dog was still out there, and now it had found him. The night pressed heavy on the cabin, the air sharp with the scent of pine smoke and fear. Elias Boone hadn't slept. The dog, Keeper, lay curled near the hearth, its chest rising and falling in shallow rhythm. Outside, the last traces of the storm had passed, leaving the forest covered in a clean white shroud. But there were tracks in the snow, large, human, leading up to the ridge and then gone. He poured himself coffee, the bitter steam rising into the cold air. The image of those moving lights in the trees haunted him. He told himself it might have been hunters or the ranger service checking on the power lines. Yet deep down, he knew the rhythm of those lights, steady, mechanical, unblinking. As he sat, he studied Keeper's collar again. The tag, dull from age, carried that strange emblem like an accusation. Elias ran his thumb over the engraved V-19. It wasn't military in the usual sense. He'd seen plenty of tags during his years as a wildfire firefighter, but nothing like this. There was a precision to it, a kind of cold geometry. Keeper stirred, whining low. Elias moved to refill its bowl with warm broth. The dog sniffed, then drank slowly, eyes flicking between Elias and the door. Its body trembled, not from cold, but awareness. Something out there kept it tense. "You've seen things worse than fire, haven't you?" Elias muttered. He tried to shake off the feeling and get to work. The storm had knocked down one of his lines of traps, and he needed food for the week. He bundled up, pulled his rifle strap over his shoulder, and stepped into the snow-covered silence. Keeper hobbled after him, refusing to stay inside despite his command. They followed the ridge path, the kind of trail Elias could walk blindfolded. The snow muffled every sound, and yet every so often, he heard something, a faint electronic buzz, like static in the air. He turned several times, scanning the tree line. Nothing but endless white and the whisper of wind. Then Keeper froze. His ears perked toward a cluster of boulders ahead. Elias raised his rifle and advanced slowly. The smell hit first. Metal, rust, and something chemical, faint but wrong for the wilderness. Behind the rocks, half buried in snow, lay a steel barrel. Its surface was corroded, but the faint remains of a symbol stood clear. A triangle enclosing an eye, the same as on Keeper's tag. Elias crouched beside it, brushing the snow away. Federal property, the faded stencil read. Below it, a serial number, Project Vigilance, V19. The back of his neck tightened. "You've got to be kidding me." He pried open the rusted lid with his knife. Inside were torn folders, metal tubing, and a small black device, like a receiver or tracker. Most of the papers were waterlogged beyond reading, but one fragment still held legible words: neural control mapping. Animal behavioral response, Phase 3. He read it twice, unable to make sense of it. This wasn't old mining gear. This was military, or worse, something hidden in plain sight. He pocketed the fragment and looked down at Keeper. "Guess you came from one of these, huh?" The dog's eyes met his, and in that moment, he felt something heavy, a strange guilt, like the forest itself watching him. When he returned to the cabin, dusk had fallen again. The sky burned orange between the black pines. Elias lit a lantern, spread the soaked paper on the table, and watched the words blur as they dried. His mind raced back to an old story from his firefighting days. Rumors of government testing zones in the Rockies, where animals disappeared, where people heard humming in the woods. He'd laughed then. He wasn't laughing now. As he leaned closer to the document, Keeper's head shot up, ears twitching. A second later, Elias heard it too. A low hum outside, almost like an engine idling beneath the wind. He blew out the lantern and grabbed his rifle. Through the frosted window, he saw 2 pinpoints of white light moving in slow arcs near the tree line. They weren't flashlights. They hovered, rising and falling with a mechanical steadiness that made his stomach turn. Drones. He knelt beside the window, every muscle locked. The lights passed within 30 yards of the cabin before veering east, then silence. He waited another 10 minutes before he dared move. When he finally stepped outside, the snow reflected a faint shimmer, like ash settling after a fire. He knelt and found fresh tracks, boot prints. Whoever they weren't local hunters. The next morning, Elias packed supplies into his rucksack: dried meat, a canteen, spare ammunition. He couldn't stay. Whoever had come for Keeper would come again. He tied the dog's bandaged paw with clean cloth and slipped the metal tag into his coat pocket. As he fastened the door, he glanced toward the horizon. Smoke rose from beyond the valley, thin, gray, controlled, too clean for a campfire. He thought of Dutch Vander, the old ranger who lived 8 miles down the mountain road. Dutch had worked for the Forest Service before retiring. If anyone knew what this Project Vigilance was, it would be him. The journey took most of the day. The forest changed as they descended, snow giving way to damp needles and the faint sound of water. Near a frozen stream, Keeper stopped suddenly, growling low. Elias followed its gaze and saw something glinting on a tree trunk, a small metal disc, no bigger than a coin, pressed into the bark. When he pried it loose, a tiny red light blinked and died. A tracker. Someone had been marking the path. He pocketed it and pressed on. When they finally reached Dutch's cabin, the old man was sitting on the porch, carving a piece of wood. His long gray beard swayed in the cold breeze, his eyes narrowing when he recognized Elias. "Well, I'll be damned," Dutch said. "Didn't think you still lived up that hill." "Didn't think I'd have reason to come down," Elias replied, glancing over his shoulder. "Need your eyes on something." Inside, the cabin smelled of tobacco and pine oil. Elias laid the metal tag and paper scrap on the table. Dutch adjusted his glasses and stared for a long time. The old ranger's hands trembled slightly as he traced the triangle symbol. "Where'd you find this?" "Dog had it on when I pulled him from a wire trap. Found a barrel with the same mark near the ridge." Dutch leaned back, silent for a while. Then he sighed. "Hell, I thought they cleaned that place out 30 years ago. Project Vigilance, you said? That was no regular forest research. They were building something out there, mixing science with madness. Said it was about animal tracking, but I saw trucks coming in at night, military ones. They fenced off a whole valley for environmental monitoring. Never reopened." Elias frowned. "You're saying this dog's from one of those experiments?" Dutch met his eyes. "I'm saying he might be the last one left." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the cabin walls. Elias looked toward the woods and saw the snow begin to fall again, slow and heavy, muffling the world in silence. For the first time in years, fear settled deep in his gut. Not the fear of fire or death, but of a truth buried too long beneath the pines. And somewhere beyond the ridge, in that cold, white expanse, something mechanical stirred, waiting for night to fall. The night pressed heavy on the cabin, the air sharp with the scent of pine smoke and fear. Elias Boone hadn't slept. The dog, Keeper, lay curled near the hearth, its chest rising and falling in shallow rhythm. Outside, the last traces of the storm had passed, leaving the forest covered in a clean white shroud. But there were tracks in the snow, large, human, leading up to the ridge and then gone. He poured himself coffee, the bitter steam rising into the cold air. The image of those moving lights in the trees haunted him. He told himself it might have been hunters, or the ranger service checking on the power lines. Yet deep down, he knew the rhythm of those lights, steady, mechanical, unblinking. As he sat, he studied Keeper's collar again. The tag, dull from age, carried that strange emblem like an accusation. Elias ran his thumb over the engraved V-19. It wasn't military in the usual sense. He'd seen plenty of tags during his years as a wildfire firefighter, but nothing like this. There was a precision to it, a kind of cold geometry. Keeper stirred, whining low. Elias moved to refill its bowl with warm broth. The dog sniffed, then drank slowly, eyes flicking between Elias and the door. Its body trembled, not from cold, but awareness. Something out there kept it tense. "You've seen things worse than fire, haven't you?" Elias muttered. He tried to shake off the feeling and get to work. The storm had knocked down one of his lines of traps, and he needed food for the week. He bundled up, pulled his rifle strap over his shoulder, and stepped into the snow-covered silence. Keeper hobbled after him, refusing to stay inside despite his command. They followed the ridge path, the kind of trail Elias could walk blindfolded. The snow muffled every sound, and yet every so often he heard something, a faint electronic buzz like static in the air. He turned several times, scanning the tree line. Nothing but endless white and the whisper of wind. Then Keeper froze. His ears perked toward a cluster of boulders ahead. Elias raised his rifle and advanced slowly. The smell hit first. Metal, rust, and something chemical. Faint, but wrong for the wilderness. Behind the rocks, half buried in snow, lay a steel barrel. Its surface was corroded, but the faint remains of a symbol stood clear, a triangle enclosing an eye, the same as on Keeper's tag. Elias crouched beside it, brushing the snow away. "Federal property," the faded stencil read. Below it, a serial number, Project Vigilance, V-19. The back of his neck tightened. "You've got to be kidding me." He pried open the rusted lid with his knife. Inside were torn folders, metal tubing, and a small black device, like a receiver or tracker. Most of the papers were waterlogged beyond reading, but one fragment still held legible words. Neural control mapping. Animal behavioral response, phase 3. He read it twice, unable to make sense of it. This wasn't old mining gear. This was military, or worse, something hidden in plain sight. He pocketed the fragment and looked down at Keeper. "Guess you came from one of these, huh?" The dog's eyes met his, and in that moment, he felt something heavy, a strange guilt, like the forest itself watching him. When he returned to the cabin, dusk had fallen again. The sky burned orange between the black pines. Elias lit a lantern, spread the soaked paper on the table, and watched the words blur as they dried. His mind raced back to an old story from his firefighting days. Rumors of government testing zones in the Rockies, where animals disappeared, where people heard humming in the woods. He'd laughed then. He wasn't laughing now. As he leaned closer to the document, Keeper's head shot up, ears twitching. A second later, Elias heard it too. A low hum outside, almost like an engine idling beneath the wind. He blew out the lantern and grabbed his rifle. Through the frosted window, he saw 2 pinpoints of white light moving in slow arcs near the tree line. They weren't flashlights. They hovered, rising and falling with a mechanical steadiness that made his stomach turn. Drones. He knelt beside the window, every muscle locked. The lights passed within 30 yards of the cabin before veering east. Then silence. He waited another 10 minutes before he dared move. When he finally stepped outside, the snow reflected a faint shimmer, like ash settling after a fire. He knelt and found fresh tracks, boot prints. Whoever they weren't local hunters. The next morning, Elias packed supplies into his rucksack. Dried meat, a canteen, spare ammunition. He couldn't stay. Whoever had come for Keeper would come again. He tied the dog's bandaged paw with clean cloth and slipped the metal tag into his coat pocket. As he fastened the door, he glanced toward the horizon. Smoke rose from beyond the valley. Thin, gray, controlled. Too clean for a campfire. He thought of Dutch Vander, the old ranger who lived 8 miles down the mountain road. Dutch had worked for the Forest Service before retiring. If anyone knew what this Project Vigilance was, it would be him. The journey took most of the day. The forest changed as they descended, snow giving way to damp needles and the faint sound of water. Near a frozen stream, Keeper stopped suddenly, growling low. Elias followed its gaze and saw something glinting on a tree trunk. A small metal disc, no bigger than a coin, pressed into the bark. When he pried it loose, a tiny red light blinked and died. A tracker. Someone had been marking the path. He pocketed it and pressed on. When they finally reached Dutch's cabin, the old man was sitting on the porch, carving a piece of wood. His long gray beard swayed in the cold breeze, his eyes narrowing when he recognized Elias. "Well, I'll be damned," Dutch said. "Didn't think you still lived up that hill." "Didn't think I'd have reason to come down," Elias replied, glancing over his shoulder. "Need your eyes on something." Inside, the cabin smelled of tobacco and pine oil. Elias laid the metal tag and paper scrap on the table. Dutch adjusted his glasses and stared for a long time. The old ranger's hands trembled slightly as he traced the triangle symbol. "Where'd you find this?" "Dog had it on when I pulled him from a wire trap. Found a barrel with the same mark near the ridge." Dutch leaned back, silent for a while. Then he sighed. Hell, I thought they cleaned that place out 30 years ago. Project Vigilance, you said? That was no regular forest research. They were building something out there, mixing science with madness. Said it was about animal tracking, but I saw trucks coming in at night. Military ones. They fenced off a whole valley for environmental monitoring, never reopened. Elias frowned. You're saying this dog's from one of those experiments? Dutch met his eyes. I'm saying he might be the last one left. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the cabin walls. Elias looked toward the woods and saw the snow begin to fall again, slow and heavy, muffling the world in silence. For the first time in years, fear settled deep in his gut. Not the fear of fire or death, but of a truth buried too long beneath the pines. And somewhere beyond the ridge, in that cold white expanse, something mechanical stirred, waiting for night to fall. Dutch Vander's cabin creaked under the weight of the wind, the rafters groaning like old bones. The fire hissed in the stone hearth, throwing restless shadows across the room. Elias Boone sat hunched over the table, the strange metal tag and soaked fragment of paper spread before him. Dutch poured 2 cups of black coffee from a dented pot, then dropped into the chair opposite him. They told us to keep quiet, the old ranger said at last. Back in '85, they fenced off a section of forest north of Glacier Creek. Claimed it was some kind of wildlife research, but every few weeks, trucks rolled in at night, unmarked. Not Forest Service, military contractors. We'd hear machines humming from miles away. Elias traced the faint triangle symbol on the tag, its edges catching the light. You said you thought they cleared it out. Dutch's jaw tightened. That's what they told us. One night, the valley went up in flames. No lightning, no campfire, just fire everywhere. Next morning, nothing left but ash. We figured they torched the site to hide whatever they were doing. The old man leaned closer. But you finding this dog? That means something's still alive from there, keeper. Lying near the fire, lifted his head at the sound of voices. His eyes, amber and alert, followed every movement like he understood every word. Elias couldn't help but feel a strange connection forming, like they were 2 survivors who'd both lost too much to the same world. So what were they working on exactly? Elias asked. Dutch hesitated before speaking. Something about neural mapping, controlling animal behavior, making them follow commands without training. There were rumors they implanted chips to link the animals' responses to remote frequencies. Real hush-hush stuff. I tried to dig once, got transferred the next week. Elias sat back, staring into the flames. The pieces fit too neatly, the tag, the barrel, the drone lights. He took a slow breath. If that's true, someone's still tracking him. They knew where I lived. They'll know I came here. Dutch nodded grimly. Then we don't have much time. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, and somewhere beyond the ridge, a faint hum pulsed through the air. A low vibration that neither of them could explain. By morning, the snow had hardened into a crust that cracked beneath their boots. Elias and Dutch packed up a few supplies and loaded the old snowmobile parked behind the cabin. Dutch insisted on showing him something. If they're back, he said, there's one place we need to check. The old watchtower near Vigilance Creek. That's where I saw the trucks heading before the fires. Elias helped Keeper into the sled, then pulled his coat tight against the wind. The snowmobile sputtered, coughed, and then roared to life. They cut through the woods, the trail barely visible under new snow. The world blurred past. Dark pines, frozen streams, skeletal ridges. For hours they rode in silence, until the forest opened into a narrow valley scarred by fire decades old. Charred stumps rose from the snow like blackened teeth. Dutch slowed the engine, pointing toward a rusted metal structure half-collapsed on the far ridge. "There," he said, "the watchtower." They climbed the hill, boots crunching on ice. The air smelled faintly of ozone and rust. Up close, the tower looked worse. Steel girders bent, wires hanging loose. The control shack burned hollow. But when Elias pried open the door, he froze. Inside, under a thick layer of dust, were rows of old electronic equipment, transmitters, monitors, and filing cabinets marked with the same symbol as the tag, the triangle and the eye. He pulled open one drawer and found a stack of faded folders. Most were empty, but one still held a photograph. He wiped off the grime. The image showed a man in a white lab coat standing beside a cage full of dogs. Each animal wore a metal collar connected to wires. Scrawled on the back were the words, "Dr. Simon Graves, Field Command, Project Vigilance." Dutch took the photo and stared. That's him. He was in charge. Heard he went missing after the fire. Elias studied the photo longer. Graves's expression wasn't pride. It was guilt. Like a man who knew he'd gone too far. A sharp bark from Keeper broke the silence. The dog stood stiff, staring toward the tree line. Then Elias heard it, the crunch of footsteps on snow. More than one. He motioned to Dutch. "Get down." They ducked behind the broken wall just as a pair of dark shapes appeared through the trees. Men in winter camouflage, rifles slung across their chests. Their movements were too coordinated for hunters. One of them spoke into a radio. "We've got movement up the ridge." Possible heat signature inside the structure. Elias cursed under his breath. Dutch's eyes widened. Elias reached for his rifle. "We're not staying." They slipped through the back of the tower and down a steep slope, snow spraying underfoot. Bullets snapped through the air, kicking up flurries around them. Keeper barked once, then followed close behind as they disappeared into the forest. The chase carried them through tangled brush and across a frozen stream that cracked under their weight. Dutch stumbled, grabbing Elias's arm. "Go, leave me!" "Not a chance," Elias growled, hauling him up. They pushed on until the gunfire faded into the wind. When they finally stopped, both men were gasping. Dutch leaned against a tree, clutching his side. "They're not going to stop, Boone. Whatever they're guarding out here, it's still active." Elias scanned the horizon. "Then we find out what it is before they do." They made camp in a rocky hollow beneath an overhang. Dutch's breathing was shallow, but his eyes burned with the same stubborn fire Elias remembered from years back. Keeper curled beside him, head resting on his boot. "You ever think about going back?" Dutch asked quietly. "To people, I mean." Elias poked the fire, watching sparks dance upward. "I tried. World didn't have room for me after the fire. Lost everything worth returning to." Dutch gave a faint smile. "Maybe this dog's the world's way of saying it ain't done with you yet." Elias didn't answer, but something in his chest stirred. The forest around them whispered like it carried old memories. Later that night, while Dutch slept, Elias studied the photo again under the flicker of the firelight. He couldn't shake the face of Dr. Simon Graves. There was something familiar about the look in his eyes, a man haunted by what he'd created. Keeper shifted suddenly, ears pricked, muscles taut. A faint red glow pulsed through the trees, steady, rhythmic, mechanical. Elias rose quietly, gripping his rifle. He stepped outside and saw the light move across the valley, scanning. Not a drone this time, something larger, hovering low, soundless but for the vibration in the air. He ducked back into the cave, heart pounding. Dutch stirred. "What is it?" "Something searching," Elias said. "And it's not done with us." Dutch grimaced. "Then tomorrow we head for the Vigilance site." "The real one. I still have the coordinates." Elias nodded. He looked down at Keeper, whose amber eyes reflected the firelight. The dog's collar glinted faintly, the scar beneath it healed but permanent, a reminder of what had been done to him. Outside, the red light faded into the snowstorm, but the hum lingered like an echo. Elias knew this was only the beginning. Whatever they were chasing out here in the mountains wasn't just a secret from the past. It was something still alive, still evolving, and it had just found their trail. As dawn began to gray the horizon, he packed his rifle and the photograph of Dr. Graves. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere beyond those ridges lay the truth about Project Vigilance, and if it meant going back into the fire to uncover it, Elias Boone was ready. He turned toward the north, where the valley narrowed into mist, and said quietly, "Come on, boy. Let's finish what they started." Keeper rose, tail low but steady, and followed his master into the frozen wilderness. The wind over Bitterroot Ridge screamed like a living thing, tearing at the branches as Elias Boone pushed through knee-deep snow. Behind him, Dutch Vander moved slower, his breath rasping, one hand pressed to his ribs. Keeper trotted between them, muzzle lifted to the wind. The forest smelled of metal and ozone again, the same scent Elias had caught before the drones came. They had been walking since dawn, following the old ranger's coordinates toward what Dutch called the Vigilance site. Elias didn't know what they'd find there, a ruin, a lab, or a grave, but he knew it was where this all began. The storm made it worse. Snow stung their faces like sand, and the light was so flat that sky and ground melted into one endless sheet of gray. "Not far now," Dutch panted. "Half a mile down the ridge, you'll see the access road. Government paved it back in the day, then let it rot. If the drones are still scanning, that's where they'll be." Elias adjusted his pack, glancing back every few steps. "They'll come again." "We can't leave a trail," Dutch gave a grim nod. "Then we better make what we find worth dying for." They reached the access road by mid-afternoon. Beneath the snow, the cracked asphalt still showed faint yellow lines. A rusted sign leaned crooked on one post. "Federal property, no trespassing." Beyond it, the trees thinned into an open clearing, and in the center of that clearing, half buried under ice, stood a bunker door made of concrete and steel. Faded letters across the entrance read, "Vigilance Research Unit, Restricted Zone." Elias felt the weight of it before he even stepped closer. The air carried a static buzz, almost like the forest itself was holding its breath. He placed a gloved hand on the metal door. Cold radiated through the fabric, colder than the snow. "Looks sealed," he muttered. Dutch rummaged through his pack, pulling out a small crowbar. "We'll see about that." Together, they forced the latch open with a sound like thunder. The door swung inward, groaning, and a rush of stale air spilled out. Chemical, damp, and old. Elias lifted his lantern. The beam sliced through the dark, revealing a narrow stairway spiraling down into shadow. They descended slowly, every step echoing off the concrete. Rusted pipes lined the walls. Water dripped from somewhere above. When they reached the bottom, Elias found a switch box and, to his shock, a faint hum answered when he flipped it. Emergency lights flickered to life, bathing the hallway in a weak red glow. "Still has power," Dutch whispered. "That shouldn't be possible," Elias said. They moved down the corridor. On either side were rooms sealed by thick glass. Through the grime, Elias could make out cages, metal tables, and equipment that looked decades old. A few of the cages still held shapes: bones, fur, unrecognizable remains. Dutch's face went pale. "This was supposed to be a behavioral lab," he said quietly. "Not a slaughterhouse." Elias stepped closer to one of the glass walls. Scribbled across it in faded marker were words barely legible. "Control fails at threshold. Pain response increases beyond prediction." He swallowed hard and turned away. Keeper whined softly, his gaze fixed on the far end of the corridor. Elias followed it and saw a door marked "Research Log, Dr. Simon Graves." Inside, dust covered everything but the desk at the center. On it lay open notebooks, an old tape recorder, and a metal case stamped with the Vigilance emblem. Elias pressed play on the recorder. A man's voice filled the room. Tired, breaking, American accent flattened by despair. March 7, 1987. Project Vigilance Phase 3 terminated by order of command. All test subjects ordered for disposal. I won't do it. They're sentient now. Responsive. More than animals. If they shut it down, they'll erase everything. Every trace of what we did. I'm going to set them free. God forgive me." The tape clicked off. Dutch crossed himself, whispering, "So that's what happened." He released them. Elias opened the metal case. Inside were small glass vials filled with cloudy liquid and a stack of discs labeled Cognitive Interface Logs. On top of them sat a faded photograph of Graves himself, the same one Elias had found earlier, only now his expression was clearer. The man looked terrified. "Whatever this was," Elias said, "they didn't stop it. They just buried it." Dutch's flashlight swept the far corner of the room, where a steel door stood ajar. Beyond it was a chamber filled with humming servers, still powered, blinking in the darkness. Elias approached cautiously. "Power's running from somewhere underground. Backup generators, maybe solar cells feeding a capacitor." Dutch shook his head. "No way something like this stays alive 30 years without maintenance." "Unless someone's still maintaining it," Elias said. A faint movement caught his eye, a reflection on the glass panel near the servers. He turned sharply. Through the window, a camera lens stared back at him, its tiny red light blinking. "They know we're here." The words had barely left his mouth when the hum of engines echoed through the tunnel above. Keeper barked, the sound sharp and urgent. Dutch drew his revolver, eyes narrowing. "Back exit," he said, pointing toward another corridor branching off to the left. "Storage access." Might lead outside, they ran. The noise above grew louder. Boots, metal clanging, voices distorted through radios. Elias grabbed the case and the recorder before following. The passage narrowed, forcing them to crouch. The air grew colder as they neared the exit hatch. Behind them came the first burst of gunfire. Concrete sprayed dust into the air. Dutch fired a shot back blindly, shouting, "Move, Boone! Go!" They pushed through the hatch and spilled out into a snow-covered ravine. The light outside had turned gray-blue with dusk. Elias helped Dutch to his feet. From the bunker's entrance, armed figures emerged. Black uniforms, visors reflecting the fading light. One raised a loudspeaker. "Federal property! Drop your weapons and surrender immediately!" Elias didn't slow. He grabbed Dutch by the arm, and they sprinted toward the tree line. Keeper stayed at Elias's side, limping but fast. Bullets bit into the snow around them. Elias fired once, enough to make the soldiers duck. Then he dove behind a fallen log. "Dutch!" The old ranger groaned beside him, blood soaking his sleeve. "I'm fine," he gasped, though his voice trembled. Just clipped, Elias pressed a hand to the wound, scanning the forest. "We can't stay here." Dutch nodded weakly. "There's a cave system north of here. Used to map it years ago. It'll take you straight under the ridge. You're coming with me." Dutch smiled faintly, eyes dimming. "You'll need both hands for that dog, Boone. I've had my share of running. You take the data. End this." Elias hesitated, jaw tight. "I'm not leaving you." Dutch reached for his coat pocket, pulling out a folded map stained with coffee. "You already know the way." Elias gripped his hand once, hard, then took the map and the case. As he rose, Keeper whined low, sensing what had been decided. The sound of engines grew louder. Elias looked toward the ridge and saw headlights sweeping through the snow. He turned north, heart hammering, and ran. Behind him came one last gunshot, a single final echo swallowed by the wind. He didn't look back. By the time the shooting stopped, night had fallen. Elias and Keeper reached the entrance to a narrow cave half hidden behind a cluster of boulders. He collapsed inside, chest burning, hands shaking. He set the metal case down gently, staring at it through the flickering light of his lantern. Inside that box was everything they had died for. Records, proof, the truth. He could still hear the drones somewhere above, their hum weaving through the trees like metal hornets. Keeper lay beside him, exhausted, eyes closing. Elias rested a hand on the dog's neck. "You and me now, boy," he whispered. "We finish it." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and soundless. The cave's entrance glowed faintly with moonlight. Far below the ridge, the bunker's lights flickered once, then died. But in the darkness of Elias's pack, the recorder light blinked on. One last message waiting to be heard. The cave walls breathed with cold air, the kind that seemed to whisper through stone. Elias Boone sat near the faint glow of his lantern, listening to the wind howl outside. Every sound carried weight now. Every crunch of snow could be boots. Every gust could hide a drone's mechanical hum. Keeper slept beside him, twitching in uneasy dreams. The dog's paw had stopped bleeding, but the scar where the tracking chip had been still looked raw. Elias stared at the metal case resting between his boots. Dutch's blood still marked one corner, dark and dried. He wanted to open it again, but something in him hesitated, as though the truth inside might burn worse than the fire he'd lived through years ago. He remembered Dutch's last words, carried away by the storm. "End this." He reached for the latch. The hinges groaned. Inside, beneath the stack of old discs and notes, lay another photograph. Dr. Simon Graves again, but this time with a child standing beside him. A girl, maybe 10 years old, holding one of the experimental dogs by a leash. On the back of the photo, someone had written in fading ink, "For May." Stay brave, Elias froze. He knew that name. Ranger May Collins, the young forest ranger who patrolled near his ridge. She'd been one of the few people who didn't look at him like a ghost when he came into town for supplies. Could she be related to Graves? He stared at the photo until the letters blurred. "Guess we're not done yet, boy," he murmured. Keeper's ears twitched at the sound. "We're going back down the mountain." By dawn, the storm had thinned into a mist that turned the forest silver. Elias strapped the case to his pack and began the long descent toward the valley. Every step down felt like a betrayal of Dutch's sacrifice, but he couldn't stop now. The air grew warmer, the snow giving way to mud and pine needles. He reached the ranger station by afternoon. It sat at the edge of the tree line, a small wooden cabin with a green roof, American flag fluttering limply in the wind. Keeper limped behind him, tail low. May Collins stepped out as he approached, her uniform jacket unbuttoned, dark hair pulled back. When she saw Elias, surprise flickered across her face. "Boone? You look like hell. I've been worse," he said. "We need to talk." She frowned but waved him inside. The place smelled of coffee and pine cleaner. Maps covered the walls, and a shortwave radio crackled softly on the counter. Elias set the metal case on the table. "Where'd you find that?" she asked. "Up near Bitterroot Ridge, old government site. They called it Project Vigilance." Her expression changed instantly. She sat down slowly, eyes locked on the case. "I haven't heard that name since I was a kid." Elias pulled out the photo and slid it across the table. "You sure about that?" May's breath caught. She picked it up, fingers trembling. "That's my father. Dr. Simon Graves." Her eyes flicked to his. "How do you know that?" "I heard his voice on a recorder down in the lab. He said he was shutting it down, trying to free the animals. Said they'd erase everything." For a moment, neither spoke. The ticking of the wall clock filled the silence. Finally, May whispered, "He never came home. They said there was a fire, that everyone in the research division died. My mother believed them. I didn't." Elias leaned back, exhaustion and anger mixing in his chest. "He died trying to stop it. But whatever they built, it's still alive. There are people out there, soldiers, drones, still protecting it. Dutch didn't make it." May's face hardened. "Dutch? You mean Vander? He used to work with my dad." Christ. She stood, pacing. "If they're active again, that means someone's restarting the program. The Wildlife Service has been getting weird alerts for months. Missing transmitters, unexplained interference. I thought it was logging companies, but..." She looked up at him. "You have proof?" Elias nodded toward the case. Everything he left behind. Logs, files, samples. Enough to get attention if we can get it out. May walked to the radio, twisting the frequency knob. "Satellite lines restricted, but I can patch through to a friend at the local paper in Missoula. If we send this before they find us..." A low hum cut through her words. Elias went still. The sound wasn't coming from the radio. It was outside. He ran to the window. Beyond the tree line, 3 dark shapes hovered in the mist. Drones. The same kind that had chased him before, their lenses blinking red. "They found us," he said. May grabbed her rifle and tossed him another. "We can't fight them out here. The signal jammer's on the ridge behind the station. If we kill it, we might break their lock." They burst outside as the first drone swooped low. Gunfire cracked, bullets slicing through the fog. Keeper barked furiously, staying close to Elias's heels. May sprinted toward the ridge, snow splattering beneath her boots. Elias fired at the nearest drone, hitting it square in the body. Sparks erupted, and it spiraled into the trees. The second drone dove, firing a stun pulse that scorched the dirt near his feet. "Move!" Elias shouted. They scrambled up the slope toward a steel tower half hidden behind the pines. May reached it first, yanking open the access panel. "Cover me!" Elias turned and fired again. The remaining drone veered aside, circling. Then something new, a low mechanical rumble, echoed through the forest. From the valley below, a black SUV rolled into view, its tires crunching gravel. Men in tactical gear spilled out, rifles raised. "Boone!" May shouted. "Almost there!" He ducked behind a boulder as bullets tore through the branches, the air filled with the smell of gunpowder and wet pine. Keeper lunged, teeth bared, growling like thunder. Elias reloaded and fired again, aiming low to slow the advance. "Now!" May cried. She slammed her fist on the switch. The tower's lights flickered once, then went dark. The hum from the drones stuttered, and one by one they dropped from the sky, crashing into the trees. "Go!" Elias yelled. They ran downhill toward the station. The gunfire behind them stopped as suddenly as it began. When Elias looked back, the SUV was gone, vanished into the mist like it had never been there. Inside the cabin, May collapsed against the table, breathing hard. "You think that'll stop them?" Elias shook his head. "No. But it'll buy us time." He picked up the metal case and placed it in front of her. "We send it now." While the lines clear, May nodded, turning back to the radio. The signal crackled to life. She typed rapidly into the terminal, attaching the compressed files from the disks. The transmission light blinked once, then again. "Almost there," she whispered. "Just a few more seconds." The light turned green. The files were gone. St. Elias let out a slow breath. "Then it's done." May looked at him, eyes wet with relief and grief. "Not yet. They'll come to erase the rest." He nodded. "Then we'll be ready." Outside, the fog began to lift, revealing a streak of sunlight cutting through the trees. For a moment, the world was quiet again, just wind and pine and the steady rhythm of breathing. Elias looked down at Keeper, who leaned against his leg, eyes half closed. "You did good, boy," he murmured. But deep inside, he knew it wasn't over. Somewhere beyond those ridges, someone still pulled the strings. Someone who had sent men to kill and drones to hunt. The evidence was out, but the truth, the real truth, was still buried in the ashes of Project Vigilance. May followed his gaze toward the horizon. "There's one place left," she said softly. "If my father kept records, it'll be there. The original control station. They called it the core." Elias nodded slowly. "Then that's where we go next." As the wind shifted, the sun dipped behind the mountains again, turning the snow crimson. The storm clouds gathered once more, but neither of them moved. They stood in silence. Two survivors bound by the same ghost, knowing that the final journey, the one that would decide whether the truth lived or died, waited just beyond the next ridge. Dawn came pale and cold over the Bitterroot Mountains, painting the snow in bruised shades of blue and gray. Elias Boone watched from the ridge above, his breath clouding in the thin morning air. Beside him, Ranger May Collins adjusted the strap on her rifle and checked the compass in her gloved hand. Keeper padded ahead, nose to the wind, the faint scars around his neck catching the first light. They had been climbing for hours, following the coordinates May had found in her father's last research notes, the location of the core, the central control hub of Project Vigilance. Every step took them closer to the truth her father died to hide, and the people who would do anything to keep it buried. Below them, the forest stretched endless and silent, except for the echo of the wind through the pines. It felt like the world was holding its breath. May stopped, pointing toward a rocky outcrop at the base of a frozen waterfall. "There. That's the entry point. It's built into the mountain." Elias squinted. Half hidden behind sheets of ice was a reinforced door, its metal faintly gleaming through the frost. Around it lay tire tracks, fresh. "They found it first," he said quietly. May's jaw tightened. Then we're not walking away. They descended slowly, keeping low through the trees. As they neared the waterfall, voices drifted through the cold air. Men in tactical gear, their black uniforms stark against the snow. They were unloading equipment, setting up portable antennas. Elias counted at least 6. Private contractors, May whispered. Probably still working for whoever took over Vigilance. He nodded grimly. Garrett Cross. The name hung between them like a curse. The man who had inherited Project Vigilance after Dr. Graves's death. The one who turned science into control, compassion into weaponry. Elias studied the terrain. The path was narrow, flanked by boulders and fallen trees. If they wanted to reach the core, they'd have to go through. We move when they switch patrols, he said, quiet and fast. They waited until one of the men wandered off to smoke. Another turned his back. Elias signaled, and they slipped from cover. The snow muffled their steps. May carried her sidearm low. Elias gripped his rifle, heart steady, muscles coiled. Then Keeper growled, just once, low and deep. A guard turned, eyes wide. Hey! Elias fired. The shot cracked through the morning, echoing off the cliffs. Chaos erupted. May dove behind a crate, returning fire. The guards scattered, shouting into radios. Bullets shredded the air. Go! Elias yelled. Get to the door! They sprinted through the smoke of gunpowder and snow, Keeper barking as they reached the steel entryway. May slammed the access panel, sparks flying as she ripped the wiring apart. Hold them off, she shouted. Elias fired again, dropping one man as another dove for cover. The sound of boots pounded closer. May's fingers flew over the exposed circuits. The lock clicked, and the door hissed open. In! They tumbled inside, slamming it shut behind them. Bullets pinged off the steel just as the locking bolts slid into place. The tunnel stretched ahead, lined with flickering lights. It sloped downward into the mountain, the air warm and heavy, vibrating faintly with machinery still alive after decades. Elias reloaded as they moved. They'll find another way in soon. May nodded. Then we finish this fast. They passed rooms filled with old computers, most dark, others humming weakly. The deeper they went, the louder the hum became, a constant electric pulse that seemed to sync with their heartbeats. Finally, the corridor opened into a vast underground chamber. Rows of glass panels glowed faintly, covered in frost. In the center stood a single terminal, its screen alive with green text scrolling endlessly. Above it, a sign, Project Vigilance, Core Interface Unit. May approached slowly. It's still running. Elias set his rifle down, stepping closer to the console. The text scrolled faster now, lines of code flickering too quickly to read. He reached out, brushing the dust from a small plaque bolted to the side. Property of Graves Industries. May exhaled sharply. My father tried to destroy this. They rebuilt it. Before Elias could answer, a voice echoed through the chamber, calm, cold, amplified through hidden speakers. Step away from the console, Boone. Garrett Cross emerged from the shadows, flanked by 2 soldiers. He looked older than Elias expected, gray at the temples, eyes sharp with something colder than ambition. I've been tracking you since the ridge, Cross said. You've caused quite a mess. Elias raised his rifle slightly. You killed Dutch. I buried a liability. Same as I'll bury you. Cross gestured to the terminal. Do you have any idea what this is capable of? Neural mapping wasn't the endgame. Vigilance was designed to integrate animal and machine, biology and data, control at a cellular level. It could change everything. May stepped forward, fury in her voice. "You're talking about control, not change. My father tried to stop you." Cross smiled faintly. "Your father lacked vision. But maybe you'll help finish his work." Elias took a step closer, his finger steady on the trigger. "You want control? You'll have to earn it." Before Cross could react, Keeper lunged. The dog hit one of the soldiers hard, teeth sinking into fabric and flesh. Gunfire erupted. Elias dove aside, firing back. The sound was deafening, echoing through metal walls. May dropped one of the guards, then another. Cross stumbled backward toward the console, blood staining his coat. "You can't stop this," he hissed. "The system's autonomous. It's already online." Elias aimed low and fired. The bullet shattered the console's main interface, sparks exploding in a burst of blue light. The screens flickered, then went dark. The hum that filled the room for decades faltered and died. For a moment, everything was silent except for the hiss of smoke. May lowered her weapon, chest rising and falling. Cross slumped against the wall, breathing shallowly. "You don't understand," he rasped. "It's not just here. The others..." But his voice faded before he could finish. Elias turned toward the console. The glow was gone, replaced by the sound of dripping water and static. The machines that once pulsed with life now looked ancient and lifeless, just ghosts of a nightmare. "It's over," May whispered. "Maybe," Elias said, "but someone always tries again." They climbed out of the mountain hours later, the afternoon light spilling across the valley. The air felt cleaner somehow, the silence heavier. The snow had stopped. May walked beside him, clutching her father's notebook, the last piece she'd taken from the lab before it burned. Behind them, smoke rose from the mountain entrance as the old generators exploded, sealing the place for good. Elias stood watching for a long time. The wind tugged at his coat, carrying the faint scent of pine and ash. Keeper sat beside him, ears perked, eyes on the horizon. May broke the silence first. "What will you do now?" Elias smiled faintly. "I don't know. Maybe fix up the cabin. Teach this mutt how to fish," she laughed softly, though her eyes were wet. "You could come down to town sometime. Tell people what really happened up here." He shook his head. "They'll believe what they want. Truth's out there now. That's enough." May nodded. "You'll stay in touch?" "Yeah," he said quietly. "You and your father deserve peace. Dutch too." They stood there for a while longer, the wind moving gently through the trees. Then May started back down the trail, leaving Elias and Keeper alone at the ridge. The sun broke through the clouds, spilling gold across the snow. Elias crouched beside Keeper, scratching behind his ear. "You're free now, boy," he murmured. "No more cages. No more collars." The dog leaned into his hand, eyes half closed. Elias looked out across the mountains, the endless wild land that had taken everything from him and given him something back. Redemption, purpose, a reason to keep breathing. For the first time in years, he felt the quiet not as loneliness, but as peace. As the last smoke from the mountain drifted into the sky, Elias Boone turned toward home, the sound of the forest rising behind him, alive, untamed, and finally free. I hope you enjoyed this story. Subscribe to my channel so you don't miss touching stories. Leave a like and then comment below what you thought of the emotional stories. See you in the next video.